The central law governing the monarchy is this: institutions endure because they honor principles larger than any individual. When a person attempts to place personal ambition above the collective duty and protocol of the crown, the system itself, quietly, inexorably, begins its work of correction. This is the truth that has been painstakingly unveiled through the public drama of the last several years. The core transgression was not an isolated error in judgment. It was the fundamental choice of the individual platform over the required institutional service. On January 8, 2020, with the shocking announcement of their desire to step back and forge a new progressive role, the palace had not witnessed a behavioral violation of this magnitude in decades. It was an act that triggered a profound crisis of authority and violated the trust, not merely toward the family, but toward the millions who rely upon the monarchy for an unwavering display of dignity and continuity. The quiet question that instantly consumed every discerning observer was how someone granted such extraordinary grace and privilege could so completely and so publicly unravel their own standing. The answer, as the evidence now overwhelmingly suggests, lies not in unfortunate circumstance, but in a demonstrable chronological pattern of prioritizing self over crown. For years, a baseline of dignity and honor had been firmly established. Prince William and Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had long since aligned themselves as the embodiment of service and respect. Their public decorum was calm, their presentation flawless, and their allegiance to tradition absolute. They made the role look natural, as if the heavy expectations of the monarchy rested lightly upon their shoulders. This consistency of character, this unshakable adherence to the unwritten rules, provided the necessary moral foundation for the entire institution to function. Then, reports indicate a conflict began, one that the Duchess of Sussex reportedly felt from almost the moment she stepped across the threshold of royal life. Meghan, an American actress with a vastly different history and an outspoken personality, quickly found herself being measured against the standards of the Princess of Wales. But the discerning viewer must recognize this tension was not a petty clash of personalities. It was a fundamental incompatibility in the approach to duty itself. The evidence clearly suggests that where the Princess of Wales viewed the crown as a lifetime of quiet service and humility, the new arrival perceived it instead as a globally powerful platform, a place from which personal grievances could be aired and a new, self-serving narrative could be forged. This essential contradiction forms the heart of the prosecutorial case. Records show that the feeling of being unfavorably compared to Catherine was a central and constant grievance. But this comparison was not malicious. It was a natural consequence of the Princess of Wales's decades of demonstrated restraint and adherence to protocol. Friends, if you don't mind, subscribe to the channel. It means a lot, and it keeps our little circle growing. Thank you. All right, let's go back to what happened. When one enters an institution built on centuries of accumulated wisdom, one is judged against the standards of that institution, not against one's own subjective desires for fame or self-expression. The failure to grasp this basic tenet was the first indicator of the arrogance that would define the entire episode. We must now examine the documented pattern. When observers look closely at the published reports, the official statements, and the early accounts from staff, a consistent approach emerges. The royal family's sacred code demands the silence of never complain, never explain, yet the evidence shows a near immediate drift toward public commentary and a carefully constructed narrative of victimhood. Consider what this reveals about the core character. The moments where acceptance, grace, and opportunity were offered were frequently met with an evident refusal to adhere to the established order. This was not a series of naive mistakes, but a deliberate pattern of asserting individual will over institutional wisdom and tradition. Those who watched carefully, who trusted their instincts about the subtleties of behavior, were vindicated in their early suspicions. The subtle slights, the gestures, and the documented dismissiveness toward William and Catherine, all dismissed by some as media bias, were, in fact, undeniable warning signs of a deeper betrayal of required decorum. The timeline reveals that those close to the situation, those who understood the mechanics of the institution, tried to warn against the trajectory. But arrogance, often thinly masked as confidence, led to these warnings being systematically ignored. What many had suspected in private was dramatically confirmed by the mounting evidence of public behavioral contradictions. What was not reported at the time was the speed and depth of the staff exodus, a concrete metric that signaled a profound dysfunction long before the official departure. The pattern becomes clear when you connect the refusal to adhere to the standard royal press arrangements during the earliest period with the later contradictory demands for full media access on their own terms. This behavioral contradiction spoke volumes. Privacy was demanded only when it suited the narrative. Access was granted only when it provided a platform for grievance. The commitment to protocol, shown by Catherine in contrast, served as a continuous, quiet and damning indictment. Where the Princess of Wales was praised for appearing effortlessly aligned with tradition, the Duchess of Sussex struggled defiantly against its constraints. With every appearance, the contrast grew starker. Catherine's quiet, years-long service was her shield and her strength, while the demand for immediate respect without having earned it through the requisite time and humility was the episode's first fatal error. A closer examination of the 2018 engagement interview reveals a critical moment. While ostensibly joyful, the insistence on controlling the surrounding narrative hinted at the core conflict, but its full significance became clear only when you connect that initial subtle attempt at control with the contradictory statements made during the high-profile 2021 television interview and the subsequent behavior in their self-produced documentary, and a clear pattern of calculated manipulation emerges. This was not a naive misstep. This was a fundamental rejection of the foundational law of the Crown, the rejection of duty. The frustration within the institution mounted because the strategic restraint shown by the future King and Queen was being exploited. They chose dignity and silence, while the narrative of alleged betrayal and personal grievance was aggressively promulgated to a global audience. Why would someone who repeatedly states they value privacy simultaneously choose to give countless high-profile interviews and cooperate with damaging accounts? How can we reconcile these glaringly contradictory statements? What explanation other than a desire to manipulate the public narrative and secure commercial gain accounts for this persistent, destructive pattern? Finally, someone is saying it. Friends, if you don't mind, subscribe to the channel. It means a lot, and it keeps our little circle growing. Thank you. All right, let's go back to what happened. The public's judgment of the situation began to form a systematic collapse of the carefully constructed image. The turning point was the exact moment sympathy curdled into an undeniable judgment of character, widely centered around the 2021 Oprah interview. This shift was quantifiable. Poll drops showed a dramatic erosion of trust. The headline tone shifted overnight, and the subsequent withdrawal of tacit support from former allies documented the fall. For a time, it appeared Meghan might control the narrative, but reality delivered its verdict when the failed attempts at public relations began to backfire with alarming speed. Those who had defended the initial exit as an understandable plea for peace fell silent when the interviews continued to mount, because the evidence of deliberate calculation became overwhelming. This preserves the audience's crucial just world belief. The transgressor chose their fate. The consequences were not random cruelty, but the natural effect of the cause. The truth is that the unredeemed moment, the point where humility could have saved the situation and restored grace, was repeatedly and defiantly bypassed. The insistence on the personal narrative, the refusal to honor the quiet institutional code, resulted in the complete erosion of their standing. The inevitable consequence was isolation and humiliation delivered not by a specific enemy, but by the weight of public perception, which is ultimately the final arbiter of royal standing. When the Crown's essential law of service is violated, the public, who are the ultimate source of the Crown's authority, will deliver its verdict. What becomes clear when examining the documented public statements, the observed behavior, and the repeated breaches of protocol together is not a series of unfortunate mistakes, but a deliberate, corrosive pattern of calculation and self-focus. This is the dopamine payload the discerning viewer has earned, the realization that your initial suspicions were justified. The core pattern is simple. The institution was seen not as something to which one must give service, but as something from which one must extract attention, power, and validation. What the Duchess of Sussex failed to understand is that respect cannot be demanded. It is earned through humility, service, and decades of steadfast duty. The Crown does not serve individuals. Individuals serve the Crown. This is not a meaningless tradition. This is the accumulated wisdom of centuries, a social physics principle that, when broken, leads to the natural consequence of collapse. Royal historians observed this long ago. The monarchy is a contract between the person and the people based on restraint and mutual honor. Those who questioned the arrogance from the beginning, who trusted their instincts about the decorum, who saw the warning signs that others dismissed as jealousy or meanness, have been absolutely vindicated by the unfolding of events. The final truth has been revealed. The carefully constructed public image could no longer hold when confronted with the reality of the timeline and the contradictions of documented statements. You were right. Your suspicions were justified. You saw what others missed. The moral summary of this episode is stark and undeniable. The events demonstrate that institutions endure because they honor principles larger than any one person. Arrogance, when it challenges the foundations of duty and tradition, will always meet the same inevitable consequence. The quiet dignity of those who chose restraint has been proven to be the correct, honorable path. This entire episode is a masterclass in how self-regard leads to self-destruction, and how humility and service are the only true currency of the Crown. This is what happens when you disrespect tradition. The natural justice that has arrived is not the result of a deliberate, vengeful hand, but through the natural erosion of trust and the inevitable unraveling of a narrative built on personal ambition rather than quiet honor. Those who observed carefully from the beginning, who recognized the warning signs of manipulation, now have the full satisfaction of knowing their discernment was accurate. The mask finally fell, and the reality of the emotional void, the powerlessness that could not be solved by status, was exposed. This provides the essential satisfaction that the elite who thought they were special were humbled by the very institution they sought to exploit. The evidence clearly indicates the pattern. On their wedding day, a moment of grace was bestowed. On the first anniversary, the pattern of disrespect for the established media protocol became undeniable. And by the formal relinquishing of their HRH titles for working purposes, the public judgment was already delivered and confirmed. The full accounting for the damage to the institution's image, the strain on the monarchy's continuity, and the cost of the betrayal of trust may take decades to tally. Recent developments suggest an ongoing calculation that seeks to reframe the collapse as a righteous sacrifice. But the evidence of arrogance and the violation of the balance between individual ambition and institutional responsibility remains etched on the public record. The question that remains is whether there will ever be a genuine moment of humility, a recognition that the social contract was deliberately broken, and whether the principles of duty and respect can ever be fully restored to the dynamic. Only time will reveal whether the truth, which has been so painfully revealed through this collapse, will ever be acknowledged by those who instigated it, or whether the pattern of grievance will continue to spiral outward. The question that remains is the fate of the relationship between the two brothers, William and Harry, and whether a personal wound inflicted on a global stage can ever truly be healed when the core principles of honor remain unreconciled. These observations are drawn from public records, observable behavior, and documented events. Viewers are encouraged to verify independently and form their own conclusions. The truth, as always, reveals itself to those patient enough to observe. And if you love royal surprises, click on the video on your screen. That's the next chapter, and you won't believe what they did.